Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Nostalgia Bubble podcast, the show where two lifelong best friends celebrate the movies that they love. I'm one of your hosts, Shuggy, an amateur film reviewer.
And I'm Nye, Shuggy's personal security.
I need that security. I'm always under threat. And we are part 2 of our Halloween month.
Yes, we are.
And you got to pick this week.
I did, yeah. I chose The Sixth Sense. This was my first kind of real experience of horror films. I think this was, the first proper horror film I saw. Because I watched it quite young, and I think I didn't really pick up on quite a lot of the hints dropped. M. Night Shyamalan loves a twist.
What a twist! To quote Robot Chicken.
And of course, with a twist, there is quite often sort of foreshadowing, which I didn't pick up on as a kid. So, although having spoken to people since, they have described it as the best twist ever. Some people. This for me was just kind of my first experience of horror, and I just have like a real soft spot for it. I think watching it back, I obviously have a slightly different opinion as I am now an adult, and I know what the twist is. That's why I chose this one.
Yeah, I definitely came to The Sixth Sense sort of later in life than you did. I'd already knew the twist going in when I first saw it. It's such a well-known twist, up there with Darth Vader being Luke's dad, in terms of how well-known. Sorry, anyone who's not seen The Empire Strikes Back. The one person. Specifically, we have one friend who's never seen Star Wars, I know that.
Oh, really? Who?
Ronnie.
Oh, okay, well,
the tracks.
she's going to be, it makes sense, figures.
Yeah.
Okay.
I always found that this film, because I was waiting for the twist as a younger person, I wasn't, as much attention to the film like the rest of it, because I still wasn't as, into films as I am now when I saw it. So it was interesting coming to it with, a new kind of appreciation for films in general. And I think I definitely regarded it higher this time than I did the first time I saw it.
Okay, regarded it higher.
I think it's a better film.
Bodes well.
I think it's a better film than I gave it credit for when I first watched it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I mean, especially having watched Hereditary so recently, and obviously Toni Collette being in both of them. It's interesting watching her performance, and it's interesting kind of putting her into the context of a different sort of horror film.
You say a different sort of horror film. I think there are a lot of thematic parallels between the two.
I'm sure there are.
I feel that this is also kind of a horror film that is more focused on personal relationships and almost this family drama of Cole and Lynn. As well as Malcolm and his wife.
Yeah, well, I think there is a lot of that, and I think, the one thing is that about this film is that it's all kind of built around sort of working its way up to that twist. So all of those relationships, everything that you see in those relationships, kind of just they edge you towards putting things together.
I think,
especially with Malcolm and his wife.
Yeah, I think with his story, definitely it's all about building up to that twist. I don't think that as much applies to Cole's story. Even his relationship with Malcolm, despite the fact that Malcolm is dead the entire film, I think that's still a powerful relationship. I think his relationship with his mum leading up to that, final scene in the car, that doesn't in any way rely on, Malcolm being dead. It's all about Cole's ability to see the ghosts.
Yeah, well, it's also about the way that he kind of relates to the ghosts, which is obviously kind of very much informed by his relationship with Malcolm. And the one thing I noticed this time around was that there are some very clear visual parallels between Cole and, is it Vincent? I think is the younger, the first patient that Malcolm had.
Yeah.
And
Donnie Wahlberg.
Yes, yeah. I mean, just as well as kind of the fact that they look similar, and they both have that kind of white streak in their hair. The sort of, you see Malcolm at the beginning sitting with the kind of his analysis of the two, and they're basically identical. And yeah, I mean, I just there again, like, there's just a lot that I picked up on this time round, which I never done as a kid. I don't think it's because it's as kind of inconspicuous as some of the things were in Hereditary, say, but I think it's just because I'm potentially a lot more attentive to the details in films, or I just have a more mature understanding of it.
Yeah. Before we go any further into it, I'll do a quick bit of pre-production on the film.
Yeah.
So M. Night Shyamalan, he wrote this script, and it was read by someone called David Vogel, who at the time was the president of production at Walt Disney Studios. He loved it. He loved this script, and he bought the rights for $3 million, which is a lot, without any corporate approval, and with the stipulation that Shyamalan could direct. I wonder if this had any relation on him being fired from his role at Disney. I don't know, but he was.
Right.
So Disney were like, we don't like this script. It's not a Disney film, let's be real. I'm not surprised.
I mean, watching it back, the script is not my favourite thing. There are a couple of lines in it which I thought were very cringy. But yeah, carry on.
But anyway, so Disney didn't love it. They didn't think it'd be a big hit. So they sold the production rights to Spyglass Entertainment, who made the film.
Okay.
But they retained the distribution rights, which turned out to be an amazing move because they got a ton of profits from it. But it's just wild, like, that it was just this guy who was working at Disney and went out without any approval for them, was just like, I'm buying this. And that's pretty much given Shyamalan his career.
Right, okay, so it basically just kind of kick-started it.
Yeah, it was just this one guy who broke away from, the rest of Disney. He was like, I'm buying this script for $3 million.
That's mad.
I think the big kind of casting choice in the film is Haley Joel Osment as Cole. Shyamalan was actually really apprehensive about him when he saw the audition tape. He described him as this really sweet cherub, kind of beautiful blonde boy, and didn't think he had like the darkness to sort of play Cole. But I mean, clearly was won over, and he talked about the vulnerability that he managed to bring to it, which I think Haley Joel Osment is incredible in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what gives the character its sort of his grounding. The fact that he is this sweet kid, he's constantly struggling with he's kind of being torn between being that kind of kind, caring kid and the one that is just terrified and on the edge and like, yeah, I think naturally Haley Joel Osment brings that to the character, and yeah, I mean ultimately I'd say that they made a good decision. Obviously I don't know who else was up for the role, but
I don't know if they talked about anyone. I assume it was young kids, a lot of them, who didn't have any acting experience or not anything or unknown.
Yeah.
So should we get into this film?
Yes, let's.
I just want to talk the kind of opening sequence, which is the only time in the film Malcolm's actually alive. There's a really...
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. I mean, if you're listening to this, you must have seen the film or not care.
Or know the twist already.
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows the twist already.
Yeah.
So there's a really interesting thing in this where Bruce Willis, all the clothing he wears throughout the film is clothing that he touches during this sequence.
Okay.
So you've got
okay, I didn't know this.
So you've got his sort of 3-piece suit that he wears in various different parts. He's got that sweater that he puts on, and he's got his big coat.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
all his clothing, all his outfits throughout the film are some combination of these,
Okay, interesting.
which is just like
That makes
it's a
sense.
really cool little detail. And
Yeah, well, I did think about this when I was watching it back. I kind of thought, well, considering everybody else is in the clothing that they wore when they died, like all these other ghosts you see, presumably. I mean, that girl who's getting poisoned is still wearing her gown. So, um, I did wonder what's kind of allowing him to sort of go home and live everyday life
yeah,
in his head.
yeah. I mean, there's a degree to which he can't. There's the whole kind of he always comes home and tries to go down to the basement, but it's locked.
Yeah.
And then
Well, I mean,
later we find
I
out
mean,
that there's a whole table in front of it that you can't get through.
yeah. Well, Cole does explain that these ghosts only see what they want to see.
Yeah.
Which obviously explains a lot of those questions in terms of Malcolm's role and his story, because that almost just manipulates the whole story to fit with whatever the circumstances are, if that makes any sense at all.
No, yeah, it does. It does.
It gives that story the flexibility. So yeah, but I think just adding that, like, now that I know that little twist, that sort of justified it further for me.
And I think stuff like that is what makes M. Night Shyamalan a really interesting, really, he is a talented director. He's made a ton of garbage films, but the fact that he can do stuff like that, he really interesting his choice using the color red. He uses it really sparingly throughout the film. He only uses it kind of for things that he wants. The real world has been. He said the real world has been tainted by the other world, and it's so moments like the red balloon at the party that Cole gets locked in the wall.
Yeah.
Things like the church door where Malcolm first actually meets Cole.
Yeah.
Stuff like
or
that.
his little tent.
Yeah, his
in the
tent,
bedroom.
exactly. So he only uses the color red at very specific times and locations.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
stuff like that. I always think M. Night Shyamalan has so much talent as a director, and so often he wastes it on films like Lady in the Water or The Happening, which I love. The Happening. It is truly one of the worst films ever made. And
so bad that you've got to laugh or you'll cry. That kind of.
oh, it really is a so bad it's funny film.
Yeah.
Brother of Donnie Wahlberg, Mark stars
Yeah.
in
Okay.
one of the worst performances I've ever seen.
Right.
I frequently use the reaction of him going, "What? No!" in shock.
Okay. I feel like I need to watch this film now.
Oh no, you do. The twist is the trees are killing people.
Okay. Do I need to watch it now then?
Oh, the twist is
Oh wait,
not
I think
important.
I have seen this. I have seen this. This is where the trees aren't they letting off some sort of chemical?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's causing
Yeah, I
people
have
to
seen
commit
this.
suicide in ridiculous ways.
Yes, I have seen this.
It's truly awful. Back on track. M. Night Shyamalan is actually a talented director and filmmaker, and I think there are a lot of points in this film where you see that. His decisions in this are very clever. I love what he did with Malcolm's clothing. His use of red in specific moments are big things, and I love some of the sequences that he puts together. He shows
Yeah.
great horror craft at points. He shows a great understanding of sort of the emotional human connection story at points. And I wish he would put across his skills more often and stay away from the awful self-indulgent stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in terms of those kind of traits of horror that you said you saw him using and appreciated, I think that for me is the stuff that stuck. It's the stuff that when I think about The Sixth Sense, I have the vivid memories of. So I just always remember I think Cole calls her the cupboard lady or something, but the woman in the kitchen,
Hmm.
in the middle of the night when she's in the kitchen and he goes to the toilet, and I just remember, I mean, although watching it back now, it seems quite dated. In the I think like the use of sound effects and like those kind of sharp strings and to kind of um, to sort of give that sense of shock when it zooms in on, or when you see kind of like a dead ghost's wounds or something.
I
To
think
kind of
the moment where he's using the bathroom and she runs across the camera
walks
in
past.
the
Yeah.
foreground, I think that's probably like the only real jump scare in the film. And I think the film that's
There's a couple. There's a couple.
maybe
when he goes to the funeral and she's under the bed and she grabs his
actually,
foot.
yeah, no, that's another one. I think both of those are
Um,
really effective jump scares. I like them because the film's not
Yeah.
littered with them, and
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they are earned at the points they come, because that's the whole time where they're kind of building up the horror of the film, and I
Yeah.
wish there was more of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you spend a lot of time. I think similarly, uh, because this whole film is effectively based around the twist. I think you're encouraged to see this as much as you can from Malcolm's perspective. So you're kind of learning about what Cole is going through at a same or a similar rate to Malcolm. Although you kind of know that he can see dead people straight away, you're sort of getting more and more familiar with that as as it goes on. And I guess that's in order to kind of pack a punch when you see the twist, when you find out what the twist is. But yeah, the whole way through it's almost like you're gradually getting to grips with what it is that Cole is experiencing. And I think the way that M. Night Shyamalan kind of uses the sort of creepiness to inform that works. I think if you had too many jump scares, it would almost feel like it's too action packed.
No, I'm not complaining that there's not enough jump scares. I wish there was more of the whole atmospheric horror around kind of that whole those sequences. I think the limit on the jump scares makes those two really effective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there is something to be said though for the way that it almost integrates that sort of creepiness into it kind of I don't want to say waters it down, but it sort of makes it normalizes it almost, because I guess to Cole that's what he's struggling with. So the fact that it is something that he just sees every day, although he kind of comes to terms with it at the end, and like you see that moment when he's about to go on stage and he's working with that woman in the changing room who works at the school who died in the fire, and she turns round and you see her face, or at the end when the cyclist is being killed and you see her through the window and stuff, and just kind of how it's so casually thrown in, and or like when he sees the people hanging in the school, and there's no kind of, that's when there's like no atmosphere built around it. It's just there, and I think that almost works just as well. The fact that it normalizes it makes it part of his day, and even though, like, potentially putting it into a horror film, even though it's not necessarily as atmospheric or as bold, it still kind of conveys the way in which it's impacting the characters.
I'm going to have a little bit of pushback on that, I think. I believe that until Cole confesses to Malcolm... Yeah, I agree with what you say about we're kind of learning Cole's story through Malcolm's eyes. Because it's not until Cole confesses that he can see dead people to Malcolm that we then get to see the ghosts.
Really?
I don't believe we
we
see any ghosts before that, apart from Malcolm.
Do we not see the cupboard lady?
No, that's
in the kitchen.
I believe that is after he tells him at the hospital, but before Malcolm believes it.
Right. Okay. That's interesting.
So
That's
for me,
yeah.
So for me, before
That works. That works as a tactic.
it works as a tactic, but for me, it's not until we start seeing the ghosts that the horror really kicks up. And it's that sequence, sort of the whole time between us learning about the ghosts and Cole kind of coming to terms with, he should help them. That sequence of the film is my favourite. That's where it's really a horror film for me. That's where the atmosphere is tense. I push back on the shot of seeing the ghost hanging. I think that is a really creepy scene. There is build up to that. It starts off with this kind of playful scene where they're joking about the school play being better than cats. Mind you, any play is better than cats. We're never doing the Cats 2019 film. There's not enough alcohol in the world to make me record a podcast on it.
I, as a musical theatre professional, cannot comment without ruining my career.
True. So, but it starts off with this kind of comedic scene, and then there's the build until we see them hanging, and that is a really creepy moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that there's no. When I say there's no creepiness or build up, I mean, there's no implication that you're about to see ghosts.
I think there is in that moment, in that where they find the people hanging. Because you kind of get Cole's reaction, and then you see Malcolm unsure what to do, and then we see Cole kind of turn, and we see them. I think is how that played out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see your point. Yeah.
Whereas the other two you mentioned are kind of after Cole's come to terms with the ghosts and learnt how to kind of make peace with them.
Yeah, yeah. I think just going back to your point about kind of the creepiness and how everything starts to kind of pick up the pace and it works better once he's kind of confessed to Malcolm, and after so recently talking about Hereditary, I find that before the whole section of the film before he's confessed to Malcolm works better when you've seen it.
Okay.
And when you know what's going on, because so for example, understanding that when Cole's mum leaves the kitchen, then comes back in, and all the cupboards are there, open, you know what he's just experienced at that point.
Yeah, that's true.
And understanding that when I'm trying to think of other examples before then.
There are the odd ones. But yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah, so like that kind of understanding that you know what's just happened, and so when you're almost like when you're let into that side of the story, and you know what's going on, I think that for me is why that works so well.
Yeah, I think that kind of first 2/3 maybe of the film, almost, it's sort of split 50-50 for me. The stuff with Cole and Malcolm interacting with Cole, that's all great. I love that. The stuff with Malcolm and his wife kind of seeing someone new, that doesn't work on a repeat viewing.
Well, no, because you already know.
And that's where
there's a really fine balance, I think, between having a story that is fed by this twist and a story that needs you to not know the twist.
I almost think if you cut that stuff out, it might lessen the impact of the twist, but it makes it a better film long term.
Okay, what if you cut out the
Malcolm
stuff
and his
about
wife.
Yeah. I mean, it does feel a little like it's odd because the whole bit with his wife and obviously him seeing someone from work, and like that whole story kind of it feels as though that sort of stagnates the film slightly.
Yeah.
And it does then kind of, it's something, I guess it's there as substance for you to kind of put together after you've found out what the twist is.
I'm not saying you need to completely cut it, but you can, because it still gives kind of Malcolm that moment of catharsis, the final scene where he talks to his sleeping wife and, tells her that he loves her and she was never second, and that's him fulfilling his role on the, his afterlife.
Yeah.
But I think it can definitely be lessened. I'm not going to lie, it did start to drag for me in some of those scenes, particularly where we kind of move away from Cole for extended periods of time. And I may have painted my nails because I was getting a little bored at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are elements where it all ties up. So when he goes for his anniversary dinner and you see how obsessed he is with his work, because he's late and he literally just goes and sits down and tries to explain what he's dealing with at work, and you kind of, like, obviously going back to that now, you understand kind of why the dynamic there is why it is, but you always sort of, I think it works there because it's kind of tying in his story with Cole.
Yeah, I'd be interested.
So it's always underpinned by what's going on with Cole, whereas there are things where it kind of moves completely separately from it.
I'd be really interested, actually, your take. How well do you remember your kind of first viewing of the film?
Pretty well.
So did that scene work for you when you first saw the film?
I was quite young,
okay.
So my experience of relationships anyway wasn't particularly founded.
I'd be very interested to talk to someone who was kind of watching that maybe like at our age, having never seen the film and somehow not knowing the twist.
Yeah,
because for me, it doesn't work at all. Like, it's so obvious that she's not interacting with him in any way.
Yeah, watching it back, I did think, how is she, like, as in, how is Olivia Williams, the actor, how is she kind of approaching this scene? Because she obviously knows, as the actor, she knows that Malcolm's character is dead. So she needed to find the balance. And I don't think it's necessarily the scene itself, but she, as the actor, needs to find the balance between making us believe that he is sitting there, but also showing us that she's not interacting with him in any sort of way and she's not acknowledging him. That's her job, and I'm not sure she did that. I think personally, like, I understand that more could have been done with the scene to facilitate that, but I've seen films where people are sitting in front of each other, both very much alive, and they've interacted as little as that, and it's worked.
But there's there's the extra layer added into this scene where she's playing it as grieving, which she has to do.
But she also, but that's what I mean. So she's grieving because she knows that he's dead. But she as the actor also has to have this subtext or something. There needs to be, or even if it's not intended, but like body language, there needs to be something that, or like where her eyes move, or where she's.
I did notice several times
that make us believe that he is actually sitting there. I did notice that's what builds.
I did notice that several times she does kind of flit her eyes over to exactly where he'd be. Like, I did notice she did that several times. But I think you mentioned, other films, other scenes where people, are sitting, not speaking to each other because there's some kind of tension in the relationship. I think there's just an inherent tension in that scene in we're being told to believe that it's some kind of marital difficulties that they don't get on. But it doesn't work because she cannot play it like that. He plays it like that because that is what he believes. Her role will never work like that because she is grieving for the loss of her husband around the anniversary of their wedding. I don't think there is any way she could play it believable for both ways. I don't think that's possible.
The only thing that I think is that, like, I mean, when so when I was training as an actor, we had this saying that you're 90% character and 10% actor. So you still have a level of awareness as an actor, so that you know where the camera is, so you know where your marks are on the floor, you know what the director's asking of you, and all of this stuff. And it's I think that what I'm talking about is not coming from her as a character. It's coming from her as an actor. So it's about the technicality of the acting rather than the actual character that she's created. It's about that 10% of being an actor that is aware of how things need to read on camera. And that's where I think it went wrong. So it's not necessarily her investment in the character or the way she's built the character, but it's maybe the way that she's presented that character to the camera. Because you're performing for the camera. If you're filming on screen, you're performing for the camera. So for me, that was, when I watched that scene, that was what struck me, was that it was actually about it was about Olivia Williams as an actor rather than as Anna Crow, as the character.
I accept that point. I just don't think that scene is written in a way that anyone can make it believable. I just don't believe it's possible. I just think it's a bad scene. I think the fault's with M. Night Shyamalan's script. I think it's too trying to play into, we're going to do this big twist, and we want this scene where it seems like they're interacting, but they're not. And I just don't think it works because of the way the character is written and the situation.
I accept that. I accept that. Maybe going into the script, there was too much weight on the twist itself, and they shaped it too much around that.
I think if you take out some of the stuff that's like heavily relying on the twist, is like it's all about the twist, I still think the twist is effective. Like you can still hide that he's a ghost. You just don't need every scene. A lot of the scenes where it's about it.
So you think it's almost kind of too on the nose. Like it doesn't. If you weren't being shown that they had marital problems, you would still assume that he was alive.
You can still have like the scenes where he's coming home and she won't talk. She's in bed and like not interacting with him, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you can infer sort of the more subtle marital problems. So you can infer that rather than the like in your face aspect of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I understand that. I mean, I think what was wrong with that scene was more than just the writing.
Oh no, I'm not.
Like I personally put it down to the actor's decisions, but I think ultimately, rather than trying to correct that scene, you could have just not had it in the first place.
Yeah. I'm not saying that she couldn't have done better, but I think even like a Meryl Streep or a Kate Blanchett wouldn't have made that a great scene. I just think that's a bad scene.
I see what you mean. It was very much hindered by the writing and actually. Like the scene, I guess, just on the nose. It was very much in your face, trying to push this point that didn't necessarily need to be made.
Whereas, like a scene, I think where there is some degree of trying to sell that Malcolm is, other people are aware of him, is the one where Cole comes home from school and Malcolm and Lynn are sitting in the chairs. And you kind of your brain immediately goes to, they have been having some conversation about Cole.
Yeah.
And that she's there. And when she goes, you've got an hour, you're not necessarily thinking she's only talking about making some food for him. She's like, you've got an hour with Malcolm.
Yeah.
So that's where it works.
This scene for me, in particular, was the one where I remember coming away from this film as a kid and thinking, that was the scene that absolutely duped me.
Right, okay.
Yeah, because I just immediately saw him there and I thought, right, okay, that's and to be honest, that's enough.
Yeah, I think he.
That's enough to make you believe that he's alive.
Yeah.
Like and not necessarily just the once, but also like when Cole has his kind of breakdown in class with the teacher and he's sitting in that kind of boardroom or that sort of. The
school kind of office.
And then Malcolm just walks in. So you kind of just assume that he's meant to be there as his therapist, and that's enough to make you believe that he is alive.
Yeah, that's why. That's
And
why I think if you take out a lot of the Malcolm's sort of personal relationship stuff, I still think the twist is effective. Maybe it's not
yeah,
like as big, but I still think it is a very effective twist, and I think it hurts
yeah,
the film less on reviewing. Because I also want to say that the rest of this scene, where it's kind of Malcolm and Cole, the whole, I'm going to try and
taking
read
a
your mind.
step towards it's brilliant.
I love this scene. This is
Yeah,
possibly, like, from a non-horror point of view, I think it's the best scene in the film. Um, I do like some of the creepy horror moments, maybe a little more, but I think it's close.
yeah. I think Haley Joel Osment did a brilliant job in this.
Yeah,
There's this. He doesn't take his eyes off Malcolm. He's clearly trying to figure him out. Doesn't know if he can trust him.
yeah,
And I think and he doesn't do much. He's just watching, and he's just taking a step forward and backwards. But I think he does at a kid that age as well, to be able to do that, and like you can tell that there's this sort of tentative sort of in like curiosity, and like even just from watching him step and have a look and like looking at Bruce Willis, I think I think he does really well with this scene. It's a brilliant scene.
I think it's a phenomenal film. I really want to, having just criticised it, really want to give some credit to Shyamalan's writing here.
Okay.
Not only I think it's awesome dialogue. This is a really exposition heavy scene. We are being given a lot of exposition about Cole, his dad leaving.
Yeah.
But an exposition heavy scenes can be a real sort of drag for the audience, but he has wrapped this up in this sort of big kind of scene where we learn so much about the characters. It's building this relationship. This is how to do exposition in my mind, and
yeah.
I don't think we get enough people writing exposition scenes in a way like this, and all credit to Shyamalan for doing such a great job of that.
Yeah, I think this is also a really good starting point for Malcolm's character. So, in this scene in particular, this is obviously after you've seen him get shot at the beginning, and you've seen what's happened with Vincent. Vincent lists off things that were diagnosed, and there's kind of a very brief interaction between the two, but you pick up enough from that, and you pick up enough from what you've seen Malcolm writing down outside Cole's house beforehand to piece together where Malcolm is at as a therapist, and immediately that's how he kind of that's how he puts gets his foot in the door with Cole. He starts from that starting point, so it almost manifests everything that's happened before, however brief it may have been, into this main story with Cole. And I think it's used as a really kind of strong marker for Malcolm's character arc, which obviously then it concludes with the twist. But the fact that I find that a lot of characters have strong arcs. They're not always that start line or that kind of flagpole is not always planted. And for me, this scene does that really well for Malcolm's character as well.
Yeah.
As well as just kind of helping you figure out what Cole is about.
Yeah, no, I think this scene has so much going on. I love it. I think this is such a pivotal scene in the film, one that still really works. And like all credit to Shyamalan and Haley Joel Osment for absolutely smashing it out of the park on this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting question. We're praising Haley Joel Osment. What do you think about Bruce Willis's performance in the film?
It's interesting. I mean, I can't say that I've seen Bruce Willis in too many films. I've got to be honest. I mainly know him as John McClane.
Yeah, and this is obviously like some 15 years after that. Something like that.
Yeah.
I might have to look up when Die Hard came out, but it's either sort of 10 to 15 years after.
I thought... I actually really enjoyed it.
Okay.
I think it feeds Cole's story well. I think what is obvious is that Bruce Willis has gone into this knowing that even though it's written around his big twist, his character is not there for him. He's there for Cole. And I think, I think he achieves that well.
Interesting. Okay, I think.
What do you think?
There is an accusation that after Die Hard, Bruce Willis just started kind of playing the same character, and then after Bruce Willis stopped just playing the same character, Bruce Willis just stopped trying.
Right.
And I think there are moments where Bruce Willis is great, and there are lots of moments where Bruce Willis is sleepwalking through the role a little bit.
Okay.
I just don't think...
Explain.
I just feel like he, a lot of the time, is just almost just reacting like, yeah, okay, that's... Yeah. He's not... There's not much emotion coming from him at all. And I think there are points where he does get great, but there are too many points where he's just... It's one note a lot of the time.
Okay. I have a couple of thoughts on that.
Okay.
So, I think in terms of giving too much back to Cole, even though Malcolm's character doesn't know it, the reason he's there is to get help from Cole.
Yeah.
So, I don't think he can give too much. Because I think inherently that character is there to take. That's what we discover as an audience. We discover that the reason that Cole interacts with these ghosts, or the reason that they come to him, is because they need the help. So I think if he was doing too much, if he was giving too much, it may undermine the fact that he is a ghost.
I think there's a two-way street. They help each other.
Yes, but I think that I don't think that it's... See, I do agree with that, but I think that inherently he's ultimately there, even though he doesn't get that. He is there to get the help from Cole. He needs that in order for the conclusion to come about. Also, I think he as a character is very much learning in this process as well. You see from the very first part with Vincent that he's got it wrong.
Yeah.
And this whole thing is a learning process for him. And it's only the following fall that this film takes place. And I think with that, because where he went wrong with Vincent was that he didn't open up enough, he didn't listen enough, he wasn't giving enough. And I think that it's very much like a process of him learning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know, I definitely get where you're coming from. I just also think there are times where the role is asking more from Willis than Willis is giving. I think there are times where I would like to have seen more from Bruce Willis, and there are definitely times where kind of he plays it fine, like him not doing anything big and just kind of listening works, particularly in a lot of those scenes with Cole. But I think there are definitely scenes where he could be giving a lot more as an actor to the performance rather than just staying one note. And I think the one time we kind of see him open up a bit more is when Cole kind of tells his secret, and he hasn't kind of heard the stuff on the tape recorder yet.
Yeah.
Sort of in between there, and the moment where he says, he needs to focus more on his family. I've written in my notes there was nearly some emotion from Willis at this point. I just think I think for a character who he doesn't know he's dead, but he thinks he's going through like this big crisis over needing to rebuild his career.
I also kind of think that that's sort of built into his character, though. Like, that's part of the way his character's written, because actually, realistically, if you think about it, if you're in a marriage that clearly isn't working, and especially as a therapist, you'd expect like there to be some sort of conversation. There's a reason that they haven't, that there's been no interaction between them. Like in his head, because he thinks he's alive, he must have justified that, the fact that they haven't spoken to each other. Like they haven't exchanged words since however many months. They haven't slept together. They haven't made physical contact. Like for his character, there's a reason why that is, and that's summed up for me very quickly when she's in the shower and he finds the antidepressants, and then the next shot is just him going downstairs to work.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a lot about his character not giving anything, and his character kind of suppressing this stuff as well.
That's fine. I also think from a point of view of him being someone who believes he's failed, who's hit rock bottom because of that, and is looking to rebuild his life, I feel there would be more to that character than Bruce Willis not emoting.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I do understand where you're coming from, and I think I need to watch it again if I were to wholeheartedly agree or disagree with that.
I feel like a lot of his character development doesn't come from him doing stuff, it comes from the plot.
Yeah, I understand that. I think the next kind of natural progression would be, if we're talking about characters or actors not showing enough emotion, would be to Toni Collette, who I'd argue maybe sometimes shows a bit too much.
Oscar nominated Toni Collette for this film, and not Hereditary.
Mate, put it away. Get over it.
Never. An Oscar for Toni.
There were times, and still are now, moments in the film where I actually find her quite irritating.
Yeah.
This is, I kind of get, I mean, the comparison that immediately jumps to my mind, in terms of character, would probably, well, for me, is definitely Wendy, or Shelley Duvall's character in The Shining. In terms of that kind of level of emotion that is constantly there at the surface.
I wonder if that's what Shyamalan kind of wanted from her.
Possibly. That for me is what kind of jumps to my mind when I watch Toni Collette's performance in this.
Now you mention it, I can completely see the comparison.
Yeah.
And that's not a good one for anyone to be going with, because that Shelley Duvall,
exactly.
That Shelley Duvall performance comes out from essentially emotional torture from Stanley Kubrick.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So not necessarily a good comparison to draw, or maybe a good comparison, but not necessarily for the right reasons.
Yeah.
I think just, and that's not to say that Toni Collette did that as kind of a result of emotional.
No, not at all.
Torture from. I'm sure as an actor, well, I know as an actor she can get herself there, but in terms of what came across on screen, that was kind of what I saw. There are moments where she's brilliant.
Yeah.
I think when you see, it's when she's trying not to show Cole stuff, that's when I think she's brilliant. It's when you have to see the subtext.
Yeah.
And I think she's great at subtext. I think she's absolutely brilliant at subtext.
Again, watch Hereditary.
I mean, she's also, well, yeah, I mean, going back to Hereditary, she's also great at just not showing any subtext and screaming the house down with a blood-curdling yelp.
Yeah.
But for me in this film particularly, and I think because this film is written and designed for kind of everything that doesn't happen or that isn't stated. I mean, like the whole thing is based around a twist. It's about everything that doesn't really happen, that you don't really know, as well as obviously the ghosts. And I think Toni Collette nails that. It's when she's trying to open up, or when she does open up, that I find her quite irritating. There's one point at the dinner table when she's asking Cole about the bumblebee pendant, and I actually think this is a better performance from Haley Joel Osment than from her in this scene.
Well, I think he's the best actor in the film.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think there's. I mean, just going back to the writing, there's a line in it. I'm tired in my. I think it's. I'm tired in my body. I'm tired in my mind. I'm tired in my heart, and that just makes me want to spew everywhere. That sort of writing I can't deal with.
Night.
And I mean, just quickly going on to Cole. Well, Haley's acting in this, when there's that moment where she asks him kind of one final time if he took the pendant, and he's got his hands over his mouth, and you can just see him trying not to. He knows he's got to say no, and that moment I just thought was brilliant. But from her, just a little too much. I think there are times where she kind of forces it just ever so slightly.
Whereas I think the time where it works is the final scene in the car, which like genuinely was moving to me, where Cole finally comes clean, and she obviously goes from disbelieving, and as he kind of tells the story about meeting her mother, and the truth behind the bumblebee pendant, and that, you know, the whole. I'm not sure it's necessarily the best writing of the scene in terms of the really long way round to getting to the whole she's really proud of you, but I think the performances in that I really like.
Yeah, I would say even though the writing is not completely succinct, it potentially gives way to allowing those actors to perform as well as they do in that scene. So I wouldn't necessarily complain too much personally about that. I'm not too worried about that. But I think you're right that Toni Collette puts on a good show in that scene particularly. And yeah, there are other moments where I think she's brilliant, but I also do have a very vivid memory of not enjoying watching her in this film as a kid.
Okay.
She for me was the one that I kind of thought doesn't necessarily fit with the emotion or the style of the film.
It's interesting because it's sort of this struggling single mother trying to deal with this kid dealing with stuff, and I think if you want a film that does this better from terms of the mother's perspective, have you seen The Babadook?
Yes, I have, yeah.
That kid is so annoying that
oh my god, I was just about to say these roles have reversed.
But that's the point, is the kid is meant to be so annoying. The mother being that over the top, it works because it's all about, you know, her dealing with depression over not, you know, being able to deal with this kid essentially. So you are meant to kind of sympathise with the mother of being unable to deal with the kid. And I wonder if the fact that, you know, we spend so much time with Cole, he is the pivotal thing in this film. I think Haley Joel Osment is so good that you don't get as much sympathy with kind of Lynn struggling to deal with it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where kind of it doesn't work.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that she's also, a lot of the stuff that she talks about and the things that she kind of openly struggles with are her own issues.
Yeah.
So it's the fact that she loses her job, or she quits her job, I think, is she can't deal with her mum dying, and I think they're not so much about her the strain on her end is not coming from how she relates to Cole. It's coming from her own issues that she is unable to deal with.
There are also allusions to her being unable to deal with Cole. You know, she's the one who gets the arsehole kid to, pretend to be his friend and go to school with him. And he's like, yeah, we're still friends, and like they're not, obviously.
Yeah, of course, but I think that there's always, what's always underlining her character is the fact that she's just struggling to cope on her own, let alone with Cole. I think that's, and so it almost makes her whiny, just a bit too whiny for me. Okay. I think she has almost maybe too much on her plate. I don't know, but I think, I think it's, which is maybe an attempt to kind of portray sort of realistic family environment, but I just think for the character and the way that Toni Collette plays it, doesn't quite fit all the way through the film. I think there are moments where she's brilliant, and I think you're right. The car scene is one of them, and there are just elements where, where she's not telling everything, where she's playing with the subtext. I think that's when she thrives as an actor.
Yeah.
Especially in this film, but yeah, there were just points where I was like, too much, too cringy, and I felt that when I was younger as well, and I still do.
Yeah, I
watching it
agree.
back
I agree.
now.
It's definitely a mixed bag from her.
Yeah, for
have
sure.
you got anything other specific you want to get into on the film, or shall I start wrapping us up?
No, I think I just have some really kind of vivid memories of it. Really, it's something that, like I said, it was the film that kind of got me into horror. I love those sort of creepy films. I think that is, I watch a horror film wanting to get creeped out. I struggle to. I watch horror films getting let down most of the time, but because I just don't find them scary. But this was the film that kind of inspired me to love horror.
Yeah, I'll wrap us up with a little bit of post-production here.
Yeah.
So it came out in 1999, which was a phenomenal year for films, and performed incredibly well. It was the second highest grossing film of the year, after another one we've done on the podcast, Phantom Menace. It made like $650 million off a $40 million budget, so like that's an insane rate of return.
Yeah, I mean, M. Night Shyamalan is kind of renowned for making films on not a very high budget, especially early on.
Well, I think horror films just generally tend to be off low budget and give big returns, and this definitely like shot him into stardom. He'd go on to work with people like Bruce Willis a lot. Obviously, Bruce Willis was then in the entirety of the Unbreakable, Glass, whatever trilogy. It got really solid reviews when it came out. It was nominated for a bunch of Oscars, 6 in fact. Best Picture, Best Director for Shyamalan, Best Original Screenplay for Shyamalan, Best Supporting Actor for Haley Joel Osment, Best Supporting Actress for Toni Collette, and Best Editing. It didn't win any of them. It lost sort of all the big ones to American Beauty.
Right.
And I think, we've maybe covered screenplay and Toni Collette, a mixed bag. Like, when they're good, but sometimes they're not. It also got nominated for a bunch of BAFTAs, stuff like that. It didn't win any of those either. I think there's a lot of competition in 1999. The other thing that has had a really big lasting legacy is, of course, one of the most iconic film quotes of all time. I see dead people.
I see dead people. Yeah.
Like, I have had people just randomly shout that out a window to me as I'm waiting for a bus at university, stuff like that. The last bus into town from Halls.
Yeah, it is. It does stick, that one, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's one of the most iconic quotes of all time.
Yeah.
And I think the film established a reputation of M. Night Shyamalan as the twist guy.
Right.
And that worked in Unbreakable. If you haven't seen Unbreakable, please do. It's got a great twist.
I haven't. I've just seen Split, that's all.
It doesn't work so well in films like Signs and The Village, where the twists are truly awful.
Yeah.
And so when we got to Split, like, there was all this talk of a big twist, but it's not anything that affects the film. It's like a post-credit thing.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that he's kind of tending to move more away from that is good, although there was some degree of it in Glass. I think he has developed a reputation as being a guy who makes films with a twist, and if your film hinges on the twist, as with this one, sections of this one, I think it can hurt the film long term.
Yeah, I mean, if it's going to be heavily rooted in what happens at the end, you need to make sure you walk that fine line leading up to it throughout the film.
So Unbreakable is my favourite Shyamalan film, because I think the film leading up to that twist isn't as heavily reliant on the twist. You can go back and enjoy it. And I think with this one, I definitely enjoyed watching it more. The kind of drama scenes between Cole and Malcolm, Cole's whole journey, they work really well for me still. It's the Malcolm's personal stuff doesn't work once you know the twist. And
Yeah.
as I say, this is one of the most famous twists in the history of film. So I have never seen the film not knowing the twist.
Yeah. I wonder, it would be interesting to have done this if you didn't know the twist going into it.
I mean, I'm sure you can find films where I don't know the twist.
Yeah.
I just...
No, I'm just thinking back on it, I wonder if, yeah.
No, yeah, it would...
I wonder how this conversation would have gone.
I want to find someone who doesn't know the twist of this film and make them watch it, and when they've seen it, be like, what did you think of that dinner scene? What did you think of the scenes of Bruce Willis with his wife?
Ronnie probably won't know.
I think even she will have heard this twist.
Shout out to Ronnie, we're tagging you in. You're in next.
Yeah. Great.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it from me. I don't have much else to say about it. I just have very fond memories of watching this as a kid, and although it's not necessarily the greatest film I've ever watched, I still kind of have a love for it. And it's, I mean, yeah, this podcast is all about kind of films that inspired our love of cinema and film. So yeah, this for me was one of them.
I'm definitely glad you got me to rewatch it, because much like you with Hereditary last time out, I enjoyed this more on this watch than I did the first time I saw it.
Brilliant. I'm glad to hear it. Okay, so I think we're now moving out of Halloween period.
Yes, I hope everyone had a good spooky time and watched lots of horror films.
Yeah. So it's your choice for next episode.
Yeah.
Fire away.
So you picked a film that has an actor in my film last time, Toni Collette. I'm going to pick another Olivia Williams film.
Okay.
Which, might be a bit surprised to you that I'm going to do that.
Okay. Yeah, of all characters.
Yeah.
One of the supporting characters. Okay.
I'm picking Rushmore, which is an early Wes Anderson film.
Okay, cool. I'm looking forward to that. That is actually one of the films that you gifted me on my birthday last year, or Christmas last year. And I'm going to confess I still haven't seen it, and it's on my DVD shelf waiting to watch. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great. I love Wes Anderson. Big shout out to fellow Wes Anderson super fan Ronnie. Third mention of the podcast. I love Wes Anderson, and this is like one of his early films, and really I think it's the first time he worked with either Jason Schwartzman or Bill Murray. So to see kind of those two very long-term relationships in film start is a great joy, and I hope you enjoy it, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it. It's a fun comedy.
Great. We need something a little lighter.
Yeah, I thought let's turn up the mood a little bit after the horror films, depressing and dark, and maybe not the scariest films in the world, but when they're creepy, I do think they're creepy. But
yeah, I think that for me, horror is I prefer horror that's kind of that works with creepiness. That kind of that uses that as a vice, kind of a technique. I think for me is I prefer that to sort of full blown
jump scares, gore.
Yeah, full blown. Well, I mean, jump scares ride off the back of it being creepy.
I think jump scares are well overused and cheapen the experience. I think let the
and often very predictable.
Speak. Even like being away from predictable, I think you can have one or two, but let the creepy atmosphere speak. And I think that's what both the films we've talked about do well when they go horror film.
Yeah. But yes, Rushmore, I'm looking forward to it. Definitely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find the podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube. You can follow us on @NostalgiaBubble on Twitter and @NostalgiaBubble Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me @ShuggySays, that's SHUGGIE Says, on all social media platforms.
And you can find me on Twitter @NyeReese, so NYEREES, and Instagram @ReeseNye, so REESNYE.
And I'll put all those links down below, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.